Alright, so here we go. Today we're going to look at dimensioning the first two blocks, and then you guys will be able to go and dimension the last two on your own. We've got our L block, U block, slant block, and step block. And as we go through them, please double check that you drew them correctly. Okay? So when we start off here with the L block, your overall dimensions, you should be 6 blocks high, 12 blocks long, and 7 blocks deep. And when we talk about dimensioning, there are hundreds of dimensioning rules, but I'm probably only going to talk about less than 10 with you guys, because for what we're doing, that's all we really need to know. The other thing that we will do, at least to start with, is we will only put one dimension in each view. So our drawings aren't really going to be fully dimensioned, but we are going to know overall width, overall depth, and overall height. Okay? So we're going to try to be pretty consistent with where we put our dimensions in the beginning. This can change later on. Okay? Which two views could you dimension width in? Top and front. Which two views could you dimension height in? Top and side. And then depth is always the one that's a little bit trickier. You can do that in the side. You can do that in the top. For us, we're going to stay consistent. We're going to do width right here in the front. We're going to do depth in the top. And we're going to do height in the right-hand side. Okay? So to begin with, the first line that we're going to draw is called an extension line. And it's going to start about half of a square, or 1/8 of an inch, off of one end of your object. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here on the other end. Notice that on the right side, my extension line is a lot longer for it to line up with my other extension line. Okay? So one rule would be that your extension lines should never touch or cross over your object. Okay? Another rule is that you should never write a dimension on top of your drawing. And that's why I extended this all the way out instead of running it through the drawing here. Okay? So those are extension lines. The next line that you'll draw should be parallel to the lines on our grid. And it goes in between your extension lines, and that's called the dimension line. We will use arrowheads, which you do not need to use a ruler for here. Just try to make them neat. We'll use arrowheads at the end of our dimension line. And then for us, we're going to put our dimensions above our dimension line. Sometimes people erase a little space and put it in there too. It doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent and you're neat. If we were 12 squares, what is our real world dimension on this part? 6 inches. So there we go. I've got the width done. Okay? Starting up here on the top, we said we were going to do depth on the top view. So what were these first two little lines that I drew called? Not projection this time. Starts with an E. Extension lines. Thank you. So about 1/8 of an inch or 1/2 of a block off of the object, and then I make them about 1/2 of a block long. The line that goes in between them was called, starts with a D, dimension line. And I've got my arrowheads at the end. Try to keep them somewhat neat. And what's my real world depth of this object? 3.5 inches. Am I still trying to write pretty neat as I go through? Yes, for sure. So I have my length, I have my depth. What's left? Thank you. So I'm going to start over here on the right hand side. Extension line. Extension line. Dimension line. And how tall is this? Each layer is 1.5. That makes it 3 inches, right?
3 inches.
And guys, it can be a little bit confusing because we are leaving out some information on this drawing, right? If I was really a little more experienced and I was sending this to somebody, what else would I put in this view?
Like the bottom one.
I'd want to know how big each one of those is, right?
Yeah.
So if I put in like a 1.5 here or out here, would that be enough information? Right? What about up here?
Oh. Like from the left line to the middle line?
Yeah, I'd want like maybe this dimension, which is 3, and then I would automatically know that the other one is 3 just based on looking at the other view. Okay? But for what we're going to do, especially just starting out, we're going to go with one dimension in each view. One for X, one for Y, one for Z. Okay? Make pretty good sense so far?
Yeah.
Let's look at the U-block. And once again, let's start with our width or length, which we're going to just be consistent. We're going to keep it on our front view. Did you guys notice back on the L block, one of the things we try to do if we can is we keep our dimensions in the center of the drawing. So instead of putting the 6 down here or the 3 over here, we try to keep our dimensions in between our drawings. That's another kind of dimensioning rule that we follow if we can. So we'll do the same thing on the U block. Those first 2 lines we drew were called extension lines. So I'm going to go from one end to the other with an extension line. Connect with the dimension line. Again, I'm trying to have nice, neat lines that I just run my pencil over one time. And I heard somebody out there say that that is also 6 inches long. And guys, as you're looking through all your drawings and you're doing this today, double check your dimensions are what they're supposed to be. If this isn't 12 blocks long, you didn't draw it right. If it's not 7 blocks tall, 3 blocks deep, you didn't draw it right. The other thing that I've seen a few people not do correctly is lining up your views, right? This should line up. This should line up. And if it doesn't, you've got time to fix it so you can get all your points and do this correctly, okay? On the top view, what was this other dimension we did? That dimension is what? Depth. Thank you. Depth or thickness. So I'll get my extension lines in there. My dimension line. And 3 squares in the real world equals 1.5 inches. I've done my X or width. I've done my Z or depth. Now I need to do my Y, which is also the height. Go ahead and work on that. And 7 blocks tall is 3.5. Thank you. So for us, we're done with that. But if you were a little bit more experienced and we were not just requiring one dimension per view, what else might you put in there? I'd want to know how big each one of those is, right? I could dimension that on the top view and that'd be fine. And then what's maybe the other thing I'd put in there?
See how wide that is.
Yeah, I'd want to know this cutout. And here's something important about that. I can't dimension that over here. You don't dimension to a hidden line. All right? So I would probably put that right inside there when I did that. Let's just take a quick look at the slant block and the step block and talk about dimensions, since you guys did those on your own. So just look at it. You'll notice mine isn't even colored, okay? But here's the important things. 12 long, 7 high. Make sure, don't let that slant confuse you. Remember, the y-axis or the height here has to be the same as the y-axis or the height on the right-hand side. That's been the most confusing thing for people. Make sure these two line up. Same thing with your x-axis or your width here. Make sure that these line up. Okay? The break line becomes a solid line in your other view. Step block. Most people have done fairly well with this. It's just a matter of getting it centered because you notice you only have 1 block there and 2 blocks here. Okay, so make sure all your dimensions are correct. Should be 1.5 inches up on the first one. Then the next 2 are both 2 inches. And then each step is 2 inches long, except for the last one is 3 inches long. Okay? Most people have done fairly well with their projection on this. What do you see? Is there a little problem with putting your dimension up here? A lot of people have run into that. If you want to on this one, put your dimension on the top view for width or length. That's totally fine. We can do length up here, width up here, and then what are we going to do over here? Height. Okay? So as you work through those today, keep all that stuff in mind.